And I'm pleased to announce our first speaker, Claudia, from University of Michigan. She was also previously a TLC member. And it's been so good to see you again, Claudia. And you can feel free to start.
It's really great to be invited back to CEMB, because I don't know. I mean, I really had the opportunity to reflect on the time I spent at Penn and the time I spent with CEMB and all the students, and like it's just really great to reflect on this time, and I do miss it. It's different now being at Michigan, but yeah, I'm excited to just give kind of I think a short overview over how I like my path towards being at Michigan now as an assistant professor. And I hope we can discuss more in the end if there are any specific questions, because I know it's a very open format. So I wanted to start a little bit with just giving my journey. I have a little bit of a windy road behind me, and I think that is probably what makes me right now, but it was windy. So I did my MD in 2011 is when I graduated, but I did it in Germany. I'm German, and I went to med school because I'm the only academic person. I mean, not anymore, but I was the first academic person in my family. And so I didn't really know what's out there. And med school was something, that made a lot of sense. So I went to med school. And in med school, and I will talk a little bit about this in a couple of minutes, I realized that just being a medical doctor is not what I wanted to be. And then I started my PhD in 2012. And my PhD I did in Switzerland. I'm going to show a couple pictures later on as well. I graduated from ETH Zurich, and I spent most of my time at the AO Research Institute in Davos. But I also spent half a year at Penn at the end of my PhD, which I think kind of set the stage for my career. And so then I will talk about this later a little bit too. I decided to do a postdoc at Penn. And then a couple of years ago, I started my tenure track assistant professor position here at Michigan in the Department of Material Science and Engineering. So I'll be happy to talk more if there are any questions specific to my path or what I'm currently doing, but I thought I'm going to focus more on how I got there. And I thought I'm going to show first a few pictures of my lab, because this is my new family now, and it is my family. I feel like they're all my kids, so I have it's a very busy time, busy life, but I really love all of them, and they've been amazing over the last couple of years in building the lab and building relationships, building friendship, and really helping me getting everything off the ground. So this is currently my lab. I have 4 PhD students. I have 4 undergrads right now and a postdoc who just started. So I'm excited. And we do try to do a lot of things outside the lab. So for example, we also went cross-country skiing earlier this year, and so I'm really trying to do a lot of bonding, which is important for me, but I also realize it's very important for the students, of course. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about how I got there, and I'm trying to answer some of the questions that we received. So I think the first one was, how did I initially become interested in science? And here as well, I had to reflect on how it all started. And again, as I said, I'm the first person in my family, even kind of in the medical field. So that's why I went to med school. But in med school, we have to do kind of a thesis. It's a bit like a master thesis in Germany to actually get our degree. And so I heard that doing research is fun. So I looked for a lab, and I really had no idea what I was looking for. But this lab in pathology, at the time, I wanted to become a pathologist. So this changed every half a year what I wanted to become. But at the time, I wanted to be a pathologist. And so I said, well, let's work there. And So I spent in 3 years, probably like full-time, 1 year, and then part-time in this lab that was working on mutations in one of these cancer genes. And so it was on ovarian cancer. So very far away from what I'm currently doing. But I learned a lot. I learned what science means. I learned how to do Western and all these molecular biology things. So that was cool. But then I changed my mind what I wanted to become, and I wanted to become an orthopedic surgeon. And that stayed for a very long time. And I did a lot of clinical rotations, and I worked part-time in a private practice where we did a lot of knee surgeries and arthroscopies. So I thought, okay, I wanna work in tissue engineering, and in particular bone and cartilage tissue engineering. And again, that was very different to what I did before, but I had a lot of support and mentors, and that kind of gave me the opportunity to spend some time as a medical research fellow at the AO Research Institute. And I just wanted to show these pictures because it's not a bad place to live. So this is in Davos, up in the mountains, in winter and in summer. So this is the Research Institute. So it was beautiful. And I was a medical research fellow working on stem cells in bone regeneration. And then I decided, okay, then I learned that a PhD is possible. I didn't even know what a PhD was at the time, but I transitioned into a PhD, and I decided, okay, after med school, now I want to do a PhD. And I really kind of wanted to stay in this environment because it was kind of a smaller institute, but we were all really close to each other, and I really enjoyed working there. And so I transitioned into a PhD, but it wasn't that straightforward because what I originally worked on, there was no PhD position available. And so I transitioned into a lab that was focused on chemistry, like polymer chemistry, and I had no idea what this all meant. But I was excited to keep working there, and I did my PhD in this lab, and I learned a lot. And my entire lab now is working on with polymers. So sometimes things change along the way, but I was very happy making this decision. And well, then I had my PhD, and I had to decide what I wanted to do next. And so here I just wanted to tell maybe a couple stories, because when I was at this AO Research Institute, it was very clinical driven, like very translational. And I had a lot of exposure to clinician scientists, which at the time sounded like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to be a clinician scientist. I have an MD, I'm going to have an MD PhD. This is what I wanted to do. But then I mentioned that I spent half a year at Penn, and in a lab that was in Rob Mark's lab, I should say this, you probably all know him. And at the time, I knew that there was this other scientist who worked on hyaluronic acid, because I read all his papers on hyaluronic acid, and my PhD was on hyaluronic acid as well. And then I had the opportunity to meet him, and this was Jason Burdick, who is one of the best friends of Rob. So I met with him, and I thought, yeah, that was very exciting to me. And I told him that I wanted to become a clinician scientist. I had my residency lined up. But he kind of said, well, if you ever want to do a postdoc, you're welcome to talk to me. And so, well, I slept one night, and I thought, okay, this is an opportunity I can't let go. And so I went back to Jason's office the next day, and I asked him if I can do a postdoc with him. So this is how my kind of life changed overnight. But I think it's kind of a nice story, because I never thought I would do a postdoc. Never. I didn't even know what that meant. But then when as soon as I started to be a postdoc, I think then faculty was what I wanted to do. Going back to clinics was my plan B, which sounds weird, but that's what it was. And so there are a couple more questions. For example, it was like, what is my inspiration? And I could say I want to regenerate bone or cartilage or the lungs, but I don't think that is necessarily my inspiration. I'm really inspired by just asking why and how do things work, and how do tissues regenerate, and So I'm more curiosity driven. And that's also in terms of how I select my projects, because I think it's mostly, okay, for example, at the time when I was in the end of my postdoc, was like organoids were all over the place. And I said, well, what I'm currently doing is very easily applicable for organoids. So I started working on lung organoids, yeah. And so now my lab is 50% lung organoids. So sometimes I'm just really curiosity driven. Of course, now I need to think about money, but generally, curiosity is what is my inspiration. And so I think, yeah, a couple more slides. How do I generate interesting ideas, and what serves as an inspiration? Well, that's difficult. I mean, sometimes I wonder how I can do all this, but I did want to mention here that for me, over the last couple of years, I realized that discussing with my students, especially in a group, is where I get my ideas from. So we help each other generate these ideas, which I really enjoy. And I also want to mention, of course, talking to other scientists or engineers, but especially to those that are completely outside of my bubble. Yeah. For example, going to symposia where there's no engineer, and this is how I get ideas. And that's why I want to end my few minutes of presentation with the CEMB, because talking to plant mechanobiologists, right? So this is so inspiring, and this was so cool, like thinking about a plant on a chip. Like I never would have thought about this. And so I think this is where cool ideas and kind of thinking outside of the bubble comes out, and this is how we push science, how we push knowledge. And in terms of the CEMB, I think the community is something that I really enjoyed. I really needed at the time as well. And for me, it was also the starting point to mentor and train undergrads. I think all my undergrads that I had as a postdoc were from the institute and from the center. So that was a really, and it was very structured. And I mean, Annie was there, so it was well structured. I was part of the training, the education. I really appreciated this. And then, as I already mentioned, the interdisciplinarity is something that I probably learned through the center, and I continue to appreciate. So, yeah. So I think I spent 13 minutes, so hopefully that's fine. So I look forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It was really amazing to see your journey. Now we have Professor Taimoor Qazi. So I'm going to introduce him. So he's an assistant professor at the Weldon School of Biomedical Engineering at Purdue University. He focuses on biomaterials for muscular tissue engineering applications. And he did his doctoral degree at Technical University of Berlin in Germany. And then he did his postdoc again at Jason Burdick's lab as well at UPenn. Yeah, the mic is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Suraj, for that introduction, and also to Morgan and Giska and everybody at the Trainee Leadership Council for inviting me to take part in this career workshop for graduate students and trainees. As Suraj mentioned, I was at Penn for a few years, and during this time, I was also part of the CEMB Leadership Council. So it's definitely kind of a full circle moment where I come back and try to add some value and give something back. So happy to be here. My slides are slightly differently oriented, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I got to where I am today in terms of obtaining faculty positions and how I prepared myself over the years to land this position. So just initially a brief overview of my academic journey. So I'm originally from Pakistan, and that's where I did my undergraduate studies. So I graduated with a degree in metallurgy and materials science and engineering. I enjoyed, studying about material science and all of these engineering principles, but I was always very curious about life sciences and biology. And so I really wanted to kind of delve and get into that area. So I decided to pursue a master's. And so for that, I traveled to Germany at the University of Erlangen. And this is where I got introduced to the fields of biomaterials and tissue engineering and the interdisciplinary areas of combining what you learn from physical sciences and applying them to understand or support biological processes, which was really exciting. And by the end of it, I was so excited that I wanted to delve further into it and kind of signed up for a PhD, also in Germany. This time it was in Berlin at the Charité. And Charité is a hospital, but it is also one of Europe's largest research and translational centers. And there I kind of changed fields from a more engineering heavy to regenerative medicine and life sciences. So I worked a lot with patient samples. I worked a lot with clinicians and surgeons and trying to understand their needs and existing gaps in the way that they treat or are unable to treat patients. So that was very enlightening. I also mention that it was at this point in my career that I decided that I really wanted to pursue an academic career. And so I started to think about how I can make myself more competitive to obtain faculty positions. Part of what I wanted to do was to also gain international experience and wanted to expand my research expertise. So at that point, I decided to go to UPenn, also in Jason Burdick's lab, to pursue a postdoc, focusing on the material science and how they can be applied for tissue engineering research. And last year, in August, I started my independent faculty position at Purdue University at the Wilton School of Biomedical Engineering. Here, I'm trying to establish a lab that pursues, again, interdisciplinary research where we engineer biomaterials for tissue engineering applications, particularly for musculoskeletal tissues. So I don't remember where I read this, but I read somewhere that less than 2% of PhD holders end up getting a faculty position. So already it is something that is really, if you want to end up in a faculty career, it's something that is difficult to get into. And so luck plays a huge part in it, but I wanted to do as much as I could to position myself to be eligible and be invited for interviews and be considered for a faculty position. So some of the things that I've mentioned here are things that I started to think about during different stages of my career. So as a PhD student, I was really focused on building technical skills, really focused on my project. I think it's one of the most important things that you can do, whether you want to go into industry or into academia, is to really become good at a few skills that are in demand. And so for me, that meant getting more into material science, cell and molecular biology. I enjoyed doing a lot of microscopy. But I also started to think long-term and how I can build up my CV. Building up your CV particularly to prepare for a faculty position or applying to faculty positions can mean a number of different things. For me, that I wanted to author a lot of publications. I wanted to build a network, which I did through kind of meeting other people, other peers at conferences. That's also, by the way, where I met Claudia for the first time, was at a conference that I was presenting at. If you can participate in conferences and put yourself up for poster prizes or oral talk prizes and get some of them, that definitely helps. So at the end of my PhD, I was able to add a lot of publications to my CV. I won a few academic awards, and these can be things like dissertation prizes or internal awards for graduate research. So those kind of things definitely helped beef up my CV. I also enjoyed collaborating on interdisciplinary projects and ideas, right? So a little bit of what can help you decide whether you want to get into academic or industrial careers, to know a little bit more about yourself and what you really enjoy doing. So I enjoyed mentoring undergraduate students and master's students. I read extensively on topics and tried to understand where the field is, what is needed, how does innovation happen, things like that. As a postdoc, that changed a little bit. So instead of being very focused, I started to think a little bit more about the broader aspects of working in the field. I wanted to develop a unique research vision for myself if I really wanted to have a good chance, a good shot at landing a faculty position. I wanted to become more competitive. And part of being that is working with mentors and advisors who have a history or a successful history of training future faculty, but also doing excellent research. So that definitely helps you stand out. So these are some of the things that I kind of did to prepare myself to get to this position. Now, this is a cartoon that I just borrowed from Twitter, but this is something that I saw when I was doing my PhD. This is something that I saw when I was doing my postdoc. And I'm presenting this now when I'm a faculty. And this really tells you, gives you a little bit of an insight of how transitioning from being a postdoc and a trainee to a faculty position can change your responsibilities and your roles, even if you are still in academia. So as a postdoc, we were always working and we were always busy. And so it was hard to imagine how you could do more things within the same amount of time, but it's just that you have too many things on your plate when you are a faculty member. And so this tells you, I don't think this is an exhaustive list even. So a lot of training, a lot of mentoring, a lot of research goes into fulfilling your job responsibilities as an assistant professor. I'll come back to that, expand on some of the things that I've been doing for the past 10 months or so, but I wanted to talk just a little bit if there are postdocs in the audience. This could be helpful. So the most important thing that you can do when you start your faculty position is to set yourself up to get a good start by transitioning between those two parts of your career in a very nice way. So typically when we think about that transition, we think mostly about finishing up and wrapping your postdoc projects and then applying for a job and then signing the offer and then start a position. But I found that it was really helpful to come up with this transition phase where you not only end up on a very good terms with your postdoc lab and kind of wrap up all of your things that you had been doing there, but also start afresh and set yourself up and prepare for starting your own lab. And there's nobody who is going to come to you and tell you that you need to do these things. And so it's, I found thinking about this and been preparing for this role for many, many years, I had all these things that I was able to do before I actually started my own lab. That helped me kind of get to a good start. So that some of those things include wrapping up your postdoc publications. I still see a lot of new PIs who are many years into their PhD or into their independent position, still trying to wrap up their postdoc publications. If it's a lab, you are a very as a postdoc, you're a very productive and key member of a lab. And when you leave to start your own lab, you can leave behind like a void. And so it's helpful to train students and transfer all of your data and all of the skills that you brought and kind of establish in that lab. You should talk to your postdoc advisor about things that you will be doing in the future so that you don't end up stepping on each other's toes in terms of your research and the type of work that you'll be doing. Of course, we think about these from a professional point of view, but we are all humans and we all have lives. And some of us who are applying for faculty positions, we also have families and kids. So you have to take care of them as well. So things like moving, housing, childcare, all of these things land on your plate suddenly. And you need to kind of make sure that you are wary of, are aware of how you need to take care of them to get yourself a fresh start. So barely like 1 year, actually just 10 months into my position, I can tell you, I can give you a snapshot of things that that fall within the responsibility of a young assistant professor. So I'm at an R1 institution where research is basically the priority. So I dedicate approximately 70 to 75% of my time on research, but I also dedicate time to teaching because I'm required to teach courses. And then some time I dedicate to service to the department, service to the college, service to the university as a whole. And so some of those things that I've listed here, this is again not an exhaustive list, but if you're thinking about a faculty position or an academic career, and you're hopefully aware of all of these things, but it helps to kind of, it might even help you make a decision of whether this is something that you would enjoy doing and seeing yourself doing for a long period of time. So for research, I'll just touch upon random things like, getting your lab funded, things that can be very stressful. When you're a postdoc, you only think about your work, but when you are a leader or a manager of a lab, you have to basically make the lab run, and you never think about chemical hazards or inventory management or compliance with university policies as a trainee, but all of these things fall into your plate and responsibilities as a PI. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time here, and I'm happy to talk more about this in the discussion, but I'll just end by again showing some images. So the top row is kind of like a time series. I took selfies at different time points. I started my the first day in the lab, I had this empty kind of lab space, and then slowly things started to come in. We purchased new equipment, we purchased consumables, and so the lab started to look like something where you could actually do in and perform an experiment. It took a surprisingly long time to get to a point where we could actually go in and do something meaningful. It's always great to have students who are excited, who share your excitement for the research. So this here down in the middle, in the second row, is Ellie Tanner. She was actually a CEMB REU student last year, and that's where I met her. And so she is currently in my lab as an undergraduate researcher. This is our first cross-linking of a photocurable polymer. So, one of us is more excited than the other, which is always good to see. And so currently I have a lab of approximately 8 undergraduate students, and I'm actively recruiting graduate students and postdocs. But it definitely feels nice. It's very rewarding regardless of how challenging or stressful this job is. I feel like there are so many good things about it that make it all worth it in the end. So happy to expand more and answer specific questions later on.
Thank you so much. It was amazing to see your journey and how you developed your lab. Please keep the questions coming in the chat and the Q&A, and we will address those in the discussions. Now I'm going to introduce Angela, and she is a PhD. She has a PhD. She did her PhD at WashU University. I am particularly more interested in her job because she's working on scientific communications. Right now, she's at scientific technical editor at Nucleus. She did her PhD under Professor Elizabeth Haswell. Before that, she was a scientific technical editor at Alpha Group Medical Communications. And over to you, Angela. Please go ahead.
Well, so I actually don't have any slides presented. I apologize. A little left academia. But please, put questions in the chat, or LinkedIn is a great way to find me. But I'll pull up the questions for reference. So the first part of my career, I think, is pretty traditional. So I ended up, I had a high school teacher reach out to me and get me interested in research. Initially, my high school is next to the University of Arizona here in Tucson. So that kind of was my first step towards getting involved. I volunteered initially in a lab that studied bumblebee behavior. So they're interested in how individual bumblebees responded to hive stress and the kind of role distribution there. So it was very qualitative, descriptive kind of research. And then I ended up switching over for my senior year of high school. And my first year of undergraduate, I worked in a plant biochemistry lab. So we were interested in metabolic pathways in plants of medicinal as well as kind of dietary interests. So we studied ginger and basil and turmeric, and I was involved in the study of hallucinogenic species of sage, actually trying to identify enzymes in the pathway to build compounds of interest there. And that was a very independent project. I had a great mentor there who just kind of let me have free reign as a little high school undergraduate, and a lot of good people in the lab that helped me out. I then switched over and did my bachelor's degree in biochemistry from the University of Arizona while completing an undergraduate thesis on mechanisms underlying HPV infection in cells. So real kind of cell biology, molecular biology oriented. And then, as mentioned, I ended up doing my PhD right after that, graduating I'm a little bit young, graduating a couple of years ago in 2020 in Elizabeth Haswell's lab at Washington University in St. Louis. So my initial project was kind of more like, I think, at the heart of CEMB. It was a collaborative we were trying to build a sensor for membrane tension using mechanosensitive ion channels from bacteria. Ultimately, that it wasn't as straightforward as we were thinking. So in the interest of me graduating within a decade, I switched projects and studied structure-function relationships in one of the mechanosensitive ion channels from Arabidopsis, and ultimately had a weird experience writing my thesis, writing a couple important papers, and defending all that in 2020 during COVID lockdown and going into labs under isolation. And then I defended virtually with Zoom. And I actually have no academic career after graduate school. So things were kind of weird. So I moved back home for a couple months and started looking for jobs. And I knew I didn't want to continue in academia. I just wanted to try something different. I didn't have any interest in going back, at least in terms of a laboratory role. But I had some interest in communication. I had a lot of interest in graphic design. I'd done a couple jobs for people with that, unrelated to academia, but I had some interest in, and I wanted to be involved in science, and I wanted to be involved in reading that and learning still, but kind of taking a different spin on it. So I just looked really broadly for editorial careers. And one thing I encourage all students to do, even if you have some inkling you might be interested in something non-academic, just see what kinds of jobs are out there. So I ultimately was interviewing for a graphic designer position with WashU's neuroscience department, an editor position with PNAS, and what I currently am as a scientific technical editor with, we were Alpha Group Medical Communications, and then we were bought back in December by Red Nucleus, which is a global medical communications agency. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about my day-to-day, because we don't know. I didn't even know this kind of job existed before I had it. And so we provide communication support for a number of different biotech companies. Some of the bigger clients are Gilead, maybe Merck we had a contract with. And then we provide like more services directed at smaller, medium companies. But we provide publications writing. We have a large team of medical writers preparing presentations, posters for conferences and the like. And my team provides the fact checking, graph design, and table design for these companies, as well as some literature review and background research. So when one of our writers, we provide support within the company. So if our writer has a publication or a presentation that they're working on, they'll send it to us to have us double check internally that all the data matches what the client has provided, that appropriate conclusions are drawn from that. Are they actually statistically supported? Are they overstepping in their conclusions? And as well as making sure the scientific basis is sound. When they're providing background information, are they citing appropriate sources? Are they providing adequate support for the points that they're trying to make? And I had no idea this kind of role existed before. So I've been with the company for almost 2.5 years now, and we're rapidly expanding. We went from, I think probably a year or two prior, when I started, we were about a team of 3. And we've doubled that now. Business continues to grow. And with the acquisition of Alpha Group into Red Nucleus, there's opportunities that as we get more and more integrated for us to become not even cross-disciplinary, but help with other divisions of the company. So yeah, I thought I'd keep it a little bit short. CEMB was interesting for me because I kind of came into it at an odd point. So I was around and was helping with the initial application for the site grant. So I was one of the people that was helping with poster presentations and was one of the students presenting when CEMB was even begun. So some of the valuable things I think that anyone can take away from CEMB and a center like it, and certainly I did from interactions at all levels, is gaining knowledge about other fields, stoking your own curiosity about asking questions, as well as the teamwork and interdisciplinary action. Because in a field like mine and in a career like mine right now, it's a support role and I work as part of a team. So there is no, individual spearheading all the projects. It's constantly collaborative. We'll receive a job and we'll be helping each other out. We're constantly learning about new topics, working with the writers to make sure we have exactly what they want. We're preparing. So communication, not just is your writing good, but can you talk to a colleague? Can you ask questions? Can you problem solve with them? Can you come up with solutions that kind of work for everybody? Can you be collegial with that? And one of the things too, are you interested in creating a culture of people that are open to asking questions and working with other kinds of people? So the company that I'm a part of has really put an emphasis in the past couple of years on creating a wholesome, supportive company culture. And it's been interesting to watch because I've only been a remote employee for this company. I was hired in January of 2021, and when the pandemic hit, everyone had to go remote, and then they just kept hiring remote. So it's been interesting in being a part of these kinds of cultural activities that you're doing at a distance. We'll have little fun events we have within the team and within the company. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave off. If anyone has questions about looking at non-academic careers, feel free to put it in the chat or LinkedIn or email.
Thank you so much. It was an amazing set of presentations, and now we can open up the floor for discussion. So Morgan here will take care of the Q&A, and there are some things that I think are really important that sort of like touches all the themes that you all talked about. I know, and I always wonder before going to bed about the questions on choosing either in academic positions or in industry. So could you share how was your thought process and what were your sort of important criterias and how you decided and prioritized those things while after PhD, whether you wanted to go industry or you want to open your lab. Yeah, Claudia, why don't you go ahead first?
Sorry, can you repeat the last sentence before you? Because I was trying to read the message that that we're on Spotlight now. Sorry.
Sorry. What I meant to ask was, what were your thought process like when you wanted to go either into medicals or academia, as you said, but as also you said that the kind of work that is done in medical research and in scientific is kind of different. So what were aside your priorities, what were your things and the thought process to decide whether this is something fulfill your goals? Yeah.
It's a great question, and it's really interesting to see how Taimoor prepared for all this, because I didn't, right? And I think you do need to prepare. Yeah, I was very lucky, and I ended up in something that I really enjoyed. Yeah, or that I'm really enjoying. So I agree with everything that Taimoor said. I think in the end, I just happened to do all these things. Yeah, and for me, it was. For me, to be honest, it was mentors. So I tend to look up to people. I admire people, and I admire groups of people, and that made my decision. Yeah. And generally, I think it was also that I saw in my mentors that they were excited and that it was fulfilling to them what they were doing. Yeah. And a faculty position is not for everyone. Yeah. As Taimoor said, faculty position, then we have so much on our plate. I'm enjoying it. Yeah. I enjoy having some multiple things, because I can pick the things where I feel fulfilled right now, and some others are annoying. So I really enjoy this. But so I think this is how I made my decision. But to be honest, for me, fulfilling is if I feel like I achieved something. Yeah. And for me, this means I need to set my goals accordingly. Yeah. So right now I'm doing what I want to do. I have a stressful life, but I enjoy it. Yeah, it's not for everyone.
And Angela, how does your day-to-day work looks like when you transition from the PhD to an industry? What were your skills that you thought that would be that you build up slowly while you transition to industry, and the things that sort of the PhD sort of helped, and how we can also do that while we are in our PhD, because we are completely focused on things that are have to be prescribed to the PhD curriculum and all that.
Yeah, so I'd encourage you. So some of the things that I did were I just talked to people a lot. WashU had a particularly strong graduate program in the sense that we had a lot of student clubs related to non-academic careers, and talking to alumni as well. Just kind of getting an idea of what other people were up to. What did a day-to-day look like for, not necessarily my job, but someone who does scientific reporting at a university. What does an industry research job look like? What does science policy look like? So that, and if you have a particular position that's interesting to you, or that like a job path that you're interested in, if you can't find alumni, I would encourage you honestly to reach out to people at a company, or if you can get some connections through your school or through alumni, because that's one of the things that has benefited me at all stages of my career, is kind of you don't even have to be arrogant. Having the confidence to say, oh, I'm interested in this field, I'm going to go talk to an expert in that field. And people are more generous, I think, than you might initially suspect. Send them an email, get an information in an interview, just talk to them about what it's like. Because for me, the transition from graduate school to industry was a no-brainer initially, because I didn't have an interest in staying in academia. But it was things that I learned about myself during graduate school, as well as my entire research career, was that I enjoyed being in a support role. I loved having some level of expertise, so I did electrophysiology. But one of my most, I think, rewarding parts of graduate school is being able to provide data that supported our colleagues around the medical campus with a structure that they had recently generated of a mechanosensitive ion channel. And I enjoyed being able to help see a project or provide support for a project to its end. I also enjoyed my research careers all over the place. I mean, like I said, I started with bumblebees. I wandered over to plants. I wandered back over to cell culture. And that joy of learning, but always something new, I couldn't see myself settling down. And I know there's like room for interdisciplinary and new things in an academic career, but you do focus somewhat in a lab. And I really enjoyed learning about new things constantly. And in my current job, I am in the medical field, but we're learning about different disease indications. We might take a preclinical manuscript involved in cell culture, or we might look at a clinical trial. So that I also enjoyed, trying to think. I liked putting together panels in graduate school. I liked supporting other students. And not just with research, but I put on a mental health seminar for our graduate program once. And these kinds of more communications, more teamwork kind of aspects, I helped put together our seminar series. So I think thinking broadly about your skills and both what skills that you've obtained and what it means to have a skill, whether that's collaboration or teamwork, whether it's a technical skill, whether it's just something you enjoy, and being able to work that into your career.
All right. So the theme that I'm trying to see is that, like, from transitioning from PhD to faculty, obviously there's as Qazi said, there's so many things. I'm wondering, how do you approach the work-life balance in that case? Because for me, it is very tough to even focus on one thing at a time. How can you manage so many things at a time? Yeah, Qazi, go ahead.
Taimoor?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I would say that it's something, once you get so stressed, whether you're as a PhD student, maybe towards the end of your thesis, or as a postdoc when you're trying to publish, or as a faculty member, you realize the importance of taking care of yourself. You realize the importance of self-care, just general, because it really does affect your mental health. It affects your productivity. It just affects your general well-being. And so the best advice that I got is to schedule in something that you can do outside of work consistently, whether that's on a day-to-day basis or on weekends. So I, for example, as a postdoc, so I had a family. I had a son who was 4 years old. So we had a lot of family time, a lot of things that we could do outside of lab. So we dedicated like at least one day per week, and usually on the weekends, and to do something in the Philly area. as a family, but also day to day, having having a son forced me to not work too late every day, and so that was kind of forced in. Now, as a faculty member, I have to dedicate some time for running or cycling or doing something that just takes me away from thinking about work. And when you have so many things going on, whether as a PhD student or as a trainee or as a faculty member, your mind is always working, even when you are not in the lab. And so I think the best advice that I got, and I would relay that forward, I would echo that, is to kind of to schedule in and be very strict with time that you take off of work.
I see. Morgan, sorry, Claudia, go ahead.
No, I wasn't sure. I mean, if I should add something, but yeah, life, like self-care is the most important thing, and that's what I teach my students. Because without you functioning, you cannot take care of other people in your lab. Yeah, and I think it is what Taimoor said as well. Time is our, like, it's so expensive for us, right? It's our most precious thing that we have, and not just in fact, like as a faculty in general. And I think setting priorities and knowing yourself and knowing what you need is very important. For me, I don't have family, but I know I need exercise. Otherwise, I'm not going to be functional. And so for me, running and exercising every day is like, I can't miss it. Yeah. And so I know I have to do it, and I'll take the time. Yeah.
So I always had this feeling that in academia, even though there is a bit of freedom, there is always, like, a lot of things that on your plate. Is it really different, or how is the situation looks like in industry when it comes to like scientific communications or writing and editorial stuff?
I mean, it's a 9-to-5 job. What I work in, it's there will be some crunch times where we're working late. It's just kind of, because we're a support role for the writers in the company, it varies depending on what their workload is like, what they're able to put out. And I know a lot of them, depending on our workload, get pretty busy. But I think it's the same rules apply, really, figuring out for yourself personally what your priorities are. And whether you set a schedule by a calendar or whether it's just kind of the rhythm of your day, setting time for what's important to you. So my last semester of graduate school, I actually read the most books per year that I'd ever read, and this was fun books, but because that was my scheduled every day before I went to bed, my kind of rhythm. I would shut the computer, I'd walk away from the lab, and I had that dedicated break time, because for me it was really rejuvenating to take a break and then get some good sleep, get some breakfast, and then be actually ready to go and thinking. And it's also valuable in my day-to-day job. We're expected to perform at a high level, right? These companies are relying on us to catch mistakes, to make their publications the best that they can be, and their bottom line. We're not so critical as that they'll survive or not because of us. But it's important for the company, and it's important for our clients to do a good job. And so by taking care of myself, I'm able to switch topics at ease, or think critically about the material that I'm reading. So I think the same rules apply. And personally, I don't have a family, but other people on the team do. And it's watching them navigate. I think communication for us is important. We work as part of a team. So if somebody needs to step up to take care of a family member, take care of a pet, other people can pick up the work if we have deadlines that are available. So I think that's one other thing that I think would apply to other positions as well, as communication.
I see. That makes a lot of sense now. Morgan, can you read through the Q&As that you get?
Yeah, there was a participant raised a question. So he asked, was networking at conferences, collaborations, and exchanges helpful in your career search? If so, how did you leverage your network?
I can maybe start.
Sure, go ahead.
So definitely it is very helpful. It's also one of those things that I enjoy the most about being in this position, is that I really enjoy the communities that I'm part of, whether that is locally for example, at within CMB or greater within the field as Society for Biomaterials and things like that, you try to network. You should try to start networking at a very early stage, because you don't realize this, but the people who are at a similar stage as yours are going to progress at the same time, and they are going to be your peers, whether you're in academia or they are going to be, maybe they will apply to the same company as yours. They might have same career goals as yours 5, 10 years, 15 years down the line. So your paths will definitely cross. It's highly likely in this world now. And so it's difficult for me because I'm personally an introvert. So it's very difficult for me, especially it was at the beginning of my career, to go up to people and introduce myself and talk to them about what I'm doing. But it's something that gets easier when you start seeing the same people again and again at conferences, at annual meetings. You then slowly gather the courage to kind of go up and introduce yourself. And as you mentioned, like you will, as Angela said, like people are very generous with their time and their advice, and so they are happy to talk to you and share with you their wisdom and kind of motivate you. And then you can count on them. If something comes up, you can either reach out to them. So I reached out to a few people in my network telling them that I'm applying for faculty positions. If they have something, please let me know. And some of them did get back to me with either saying that we don't have anything right now, but something might come up 6 months from now. Those kind of tips or those kind of help you will not get without having that network. And at your own peer level, Claudia, myself, there were several other postdocs at Penn. We kind of came together to help each other out while we were navigating the faculty job market. And so even at that level, and now many of those people that were postdocs at the time are now faculty, right? So it's definitely pleasing to see your network grow and mature at the same time. So it's very rewarding for me.
Claudia.
Yeah, I can.
Yep.
Yeah, I can only agree. I was thinking about what can I add, but I think networking for me is also I think I'm an introvert too, and for me it's still hard and it's very tiring to do networking, but it is an important part of what we do, right? Because we need to communicate what we are doing, and the network is what promotes the science for industry and for academia, I believe, and it is a very important part of our lives right now. And maybe one thing I can add is networking at the peer level and the different levels above and below is very important, and it's probably different kinds of networking. And I've always got the advice, you need mentors, you need sponsors. So you need people who are connecting you with people, like the sponsors. And also think about letter writers. I don't know how it is in industry, but in academia, I still need letters, which is crazy, but it's never gonna stop. And then networking like towards students. It is so important that students also know you, because they're gonna tell their peers that there is this faculty candidate, or like there's faculty looking for students. So it's so important to network in all different directions. And one last thing that I maybe want to add to networking, for me, it was very helpful to reach out to people and say, can you introduce me? Of course, I had a mentor as a postdoc mentor who was very well known, but I utilized him. And I think that's something to keep in mind. And now I'm doing it for my students too, because I know how difficult it was for me.
So in that case, how is networking if you're in academia, how do you network with people in industry? Or like as Angela has mentioned, like you graduated during the pandemic, how can you network with people that you are not physically there, maybe online? Because it's very hard to get attention from people through online. So what are the ways that you sort of implemented in doing that?
I think first and foremost, utilizing your connections, whether that is through a mentor or other graduate students, or because I learned a lot from other graduate students, but also, I mean, I think of each stage of my career, and there's something I feel like I learned from everyone, whether it was my peers, whether it was the graduate students that trained me, the postdocs that trained me, the professors that trained me, and asking questions of them, but also just listening to their stories. And the more broad fields as well as backgrounds and careers that you can get advice from, the better. Whether I think that goes regardless of whether you're academia or industry, because it's like was mentioned before, a faculty search is very difficult nowadays, and it's it's hard to get one. But the more connections that you can make help that. Where industry, it's hard because I didn't know anybody at my company, right? And I didn't know anybody, I knew one person for one of the positions I was kind of a finalist for. But talking to people more broadly about what their careers are like, I was able to reflect back on my graduate career to think about what skills were necessary. And also I would encourage students in particular, but postdocs as well, to look at the career centers for their universities. I only touched base with mine a little bit before the pandemic shut everything down, but they can be a good resource. The career officers often will have contacts at other universities or contacts within industry. So that's one way, or just provide ideas about careers that you can pursue. But it's communicating with everybody and not being afraid to reach out to new people, but also to utilize contacts. Maybe you haven't talked to somebody for years, but that doesn't mean they won't respond, they won't remember you. Try to prompt it with a memory. But I had a professor that I worked for. It had been about 4 years at the time, and he provided probably the most substantial advice about graduate programs and graduate schools and advisors. And we spent 2 hours on the phone of this. He's got a family. I'm listening to him get home from work, but he walked me through different schools and different programs and what to think about. So not being afraid to maintain those connections or reach back to old connections as well. It's not just about making new connections. You always have to make somebody new in that specific field.
Right.
And that,
right.
yeah, and that being said, there are, as we as a company grow, we have had instances where we'll hire writers that, someone on my team knows from graduate school, and that they haven't talked to for years again, but they still remember to speak fondly of. So, yeah, it's you're sowing seeds for the future, anybody you meet, for sure.
Right. That's really great. Morgan, do you have any other questions? And I forgot to mention, Taimoor was in the TLC committee before. Morgan just told me. So yeah.
Yeah. So there were 2 more questions at the registration. So one question is, when is the best time to start applying for a job? How many jobs do you usually apply to? Yeah, this
For
is
either industry or
yeah.
academia?
I think both, probably. Yeah.
So I applied for a ton of different jobs. And there were a couple that was hilarious because it'd be a year after I started Alpha Group, and now we're at Nucleus. I'd get a response back from them saying, "Oh, sorry, we declined you." And it's like, I found a job a while ago. I think applying for industry jobs, I don't know how it is for a research lab. I think it's a little bit more flexible because they understand they're specifically looking for research scientists. For us, applications, we're looking at people that can start, a month or 2 out. So the actual application is later, but I would encourage people to job search or send contacts, even send applications with the knowledge that, like, maybe you're not graduating for a number of months, but you want information, you'll get your name with the company, they might know you. So applying, it's a little hard because it depends on when the company needs the position filled, right? My company, usually we're looking for someone to start a month out, but the job search itself can benefit you in a lot of ways by just increasing your knowledge about what positions are out there and what you might be interested in. So I think that can be done at any stage.
I see. Claudia, please go ahead.
Well, for academia, so you need to keep in mind that the positions are usually 1 year out. Like if you're applying, it's a season. So most of the times, I should say, in engineering. Okay, we're talking about engineering. Med school is a little bit more off cycle, but usually in engineering, you apply in fall, and then the first kind of phone interviews are December till February, and then are the on-sites. Yeah. usually they like to stick to these cycles because they're all competing for the same candidates. So that's the reason. And that being said, I mean, we apply per cycle, yeah. And so I personally, I can talk about myself. I applied to positions in Switzerland before because Europe is off cycle, like they just do it their own way. So I did apply, I got a little bit of practice, and then I applied to the one cycle in the US, and I knew, okay, there's much more that we can talk about, but I knew if I apply now and I get a position, I'm going to take it. Yeah. So you need to select the schools you want to apply to. And I applied only to my top choices during my first cycle. And so, I mean, luckily I got interviews, but I think I sent 50 applications, probably 40 to 50. Yeah, but you can reuse them. It's not that, I mean, once you have your application package ready, you apply it to the school.
And have you came across anyone who transitioned from PhD or academic career to medical career, or is that pipeline feasible or possible?
You mean having a faculty position in the medical, or?
Yeah, like someone who has a PhD in engineering, let's say they want to transition to medical-based institutions or something.
Yeah.
How is the transition look like then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did apply to med schools as well, but I'm a medical doctor, so it made a lot of sense. It is harder because they speak a little bit of a different language, and the system is a little different. So I think they were mostly concerned, at least from my side, that I wouldn't be able to get a sufficient NIH funding. And then we can talk about how your position is because Taimoor said we are teaching. So I'm on a 9-month salary, I think Taimoor too. So we get our salary, and then we only need a little bit of grant support. But on a med school, you're supposed to get most of your salary supported by grants. So it's very different.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
I don't know if you want to add something, Taimoor.
It was the same for me. I applied for 2 cycles. The first cycle I applied during the pandemic, and it was I didn't have any hope of landing a position because it was too early, in my opinion. But I wanted to get my application materials ready, which it takes a lot of time and effort. And these things include like a research statement, a teaching statement, and things like that. So I applied to maybe 8 or 7 jobs. And again, with the idea that if they make an offer by some chance, I will accept it. But I wasn't successful in that cycle. And then the next cycle, everything improved because you had that time to think about and improve your application materials. The next cycle in which I did land this position, I applied for, I think, 34 positions, had like 7 or 8 Zoom interviews, 2 on-sites, and then 2 offers. And one of which I took. But it's not unheard of to apply for like 60, 70 positions per cycle.
I see. Being mindful of time, Annie, how long do we have? How much more time do we have?
I believe this was scheduled to 2:10. Is that right, Morgan?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can have 2 more questions. So I just want to quickly switch gears. I want to know, how are your approaches regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in your personal capacity, what are the approaches that you have taken, both in also like in academia and also in industry, and how do you if I ask a specific question, how is your mentoring style look like when you encounter students from diverse backgrounds? Claudia, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an important question, and I did think a lot about it before I started my lab, and I've been actively involved through like organizing DI events and mental health events because I'm still learning, and I didn't know enough about how to tackle this and how to mentor students from underrepresented backgrounds. So I try to recruit with, how should I say this, like with an open mind. Yeah. Especially I definitely don't, how should I say this? Like when I see the applications, I really take an unbiased approach. Yeah. Which is a lot of time in addition. And again, I'm still learning how to do this. In terms of my lab, it's hard. It's really hard in terms of recruitment, right? Because you need first you need to develop this culture, which is welcoming to students with these backgrounds. So we're working on that. I think I have a culture that is supportive. What I'm currently working on is a little bit more the department and this larger environment to make it support to have supportive structures. So I'm taking a little bit, how to say this, like I'm working from outside inside, yeah. So I'm working on the support structures within our department to be able to mentor underrepresented minorities in a good way. So currently, I mean, yeah, I don't think I'm doing a good job in my lab yet, but I'm because yeah, the support structures are not there yet. That's a little bit what I'm working on.
Taimoor, what's your take on that?
I think it's as a PI, when you are kind of in charge, when you make the final decision, you actually feel very empowered to actually do something at the level of your lab, right? So when you start your faculty position, you get tons of emails from people from all sorts of backgrounds from all over the world to asking to work in your lab, either as a PhD student or as an undergrad or whatnot. And if you're thinking about, how minoritized groups or excluded groups are not even found in labs often, so they're seeking opportunities to get into science, and they face a lot of systemic roadblocks. As a PI, you're like, okay, this is my decision, right? So you contacted me, and you are from an underrepresented background, and I want to give you an opportunity. But you want to first self-check and see if you are going to do it justice, right? You don't want to recruit somebody and then put them into an environment that is not supportive, something that Claudia kind of alluded to. But I think at a lab level, where on a day-to-day you are going to mentor them, I think there is still a lot of decisions, a lot of impact that you can have as a PI to recruit and introduce students and do outreach events. In terms of mentoring people with different backgrounds, people who just come from and grew up in diverse kind of environments, I think I like to take a very open approach. I'm fairly flexible in terms of my mentoring. So there are people in my lab, even in a small like undergrad heavy lab, there are people who want to seek independent work. They want to seek independence, and others who want you to guide them at every step of the way. So at up to a certain point, I'm fairly open to kind of whatever their needs are, and then kind of establishing the long-term goals and making sure that anything that I am ignorant to, I try to make sure that I keep that in mind. Ignorant in terms of backgrounds, different cultures, different needs, special needs. All of that I try to be very open about, so that they can approach me with anything that they have on their mind in terms of DEI.
I see. Angela, do you feel that in industry there are structures like this and systems in place to ensure the DEI goals, and like in how the institution sort of works in that something in the industry?
I mean,
particularly.
So I think that's really going to vary depending on what company you're looking at. Like, as Taimoor and Claudia were saying, within a lab environment, if you're the PI, you can kind of control the lab environment, but you can't control the department. And if you're an entry-level employee, you're only going to be able to control so much, right? It's going to kind of depend on what systems are already in place or what management is open to. And I got lucky with the company that I applied to, and one thing that we have heard from people that are applying to, say, my team that we're interviewing, is that we have a very open and tolerant and welcoming culture, but it's something that is in place from the top down level. It's something that's emphasized at every level of management that we have. So my company has what's called, and this is more speaking towards Alpha Group. We got recently acquired by Red Nucleus, which does have its own version, but the Alpha Group one is the one I've been around with more, and that's kind of more directly related to me. So we have a committee that's a couple employees each year that puts out information about each month. We have a different theme for each month. We have educational sessions. We have Q&A sessions. We have additional materials. We have additional speakers. And I think you know, it's all well and good to want to establish DEI initiatives, but if you don't have support from upper management, you don't have support from the top bosses, it's going to be a huge uphill battle. And we're lucky because it's at every level. You can feel the desire to welcome everybody, but also to learn. And I think that's the most important part. We have the education sessions are fairly well attended. The guest speakers are fairly well attended. And it's something that is discussed openly. It's something that's brought up repeatedly at our weekly all staff meetings. And I think that's, you know, it's good to take initiatives, but I think industry is a little bit weird when you're applying and when you're looking. You may need to consider what the environment is already like.
I see. So I think we are with time now. It was an amazing discussion. There are a lot of things that I learned, and definitely all of our trainees did as well. Thank you, Claudia, Taimoor, and Angela for